Unfortunately, Faruzan is not the most Primogem friendly 4-star character. Now, I don't mean that in the sense that she's a bad character. Faruzan excels in her niche of buffing animo characters, but like Goro, she's only built for that niche of buffing one element, which forces you to have the right puzzle pieces to really make her shine. If you pulled for Faruzan, there's a lot of small details you need to pay attention to in order for you to bring out her maximum potential. As always, this Faruzan build guide will cover her best artifacts and weapons to general playstyle and team compositions. Without further ado, let's get this guide rolling. Faruzan is a simple character at a base level, but once you start to get into maximizing her potential, there's a lot more than meets the eye. Starting off with her elemental skill, use it to deal animo damage in a small AoE and grant Faruzan the Manifest Gale effect. Manifest Gale is the game's fancy way or official way of saying that Faruzan gets a powered up charge attack. Her enhanced charge attack will deal AoE animo damage and then create a small vortex that pulls enemies in. The initial charge shot is considered charge attack damage, but the small vortex that follows up is considered elemental skill damage. When combined with her first Ascension talent, this enhanced aim shot will take 60% less time to charge, and the small vortex will reduce the animo resistance of enemies hit by 30% for 4 seconds. Faruzan's burst is the biggest part of her kit. This skill will deploy a polyhedron orb in the air to move around the battlefield in a triangular path. If enemies are hit by the pulse, their animo resistance will be reduced by 30%, while if allies are hit by the pulse, the entire party gains animo damage bonus based on the burst's talent level. These effects will also apply to any nearby enemies in the triangular area, so don't worry if the pulse just misses an enemy that you're fighting. With both Animal Resistance Shred and Animo Damage bonus in one ability, you're probably thinking this is what makes Faruzan the ultimate support for Animo carries. You're right in that sense, but what if I told you there's even a little bonus? With Faruzan's second Ascension talent, she grants extra damage to your character's Animo normal attacks, charge attacks, plunge attacks, elemental skills, and elemental burst when the character is under the effects of Faruzan's burst. This damage scales off 32% of Faruzan's base attack, and once it's applied to a character's instance of animo damage, it cannot be reapplied again. This Ascension talent buff will only refresh when Faruzan's burst refreshes the duration of its other buffs on the character. Because this damage is classified as flat damage, it's extremely valuable to carries like Xiao and Wanderer, who on paper have tons of damage bonuses and crit damage values to multiply this flat number. However, given that Faruzan has a low base attack and her best weapon also has a low base attack, I want you to think of this buff more as a small bonus rather than a focal point of her kit. The only downside to Faruzan's burst is that it lasts 12 seconds at C0 and has a 20-second cooldown and 80 energy cost. Faruzan already excels in her niche at C0, but her constellations are what streamline her gameplay and make her much easier to build. There are 3 constellations that you need to pay attention to when it comes to Faruzan: C2, C4, and C6. C2 is a huge quality of life if you're not playing your rotations to a T. This constellation will increase her burst duration by 6 seconds, giving her an 18-second burst uptime and a 20-second cooldown. Theoretically, if you're building enough ER, this is going to allow you to avoid any downtime issues on Faruzan's buffing capabilities. C4 is a smaller quality of life, but given how much energy Faruzan needs with low particle generation and a high cost burst, anything is welcome. This constellation will grant 2 flat energy to Faruzan if an enemy is hit by the grouping vortex from her enhanced charge attack, and up to 4 energy if more than one enemy is hit. C4 by itself is a little underwhelming, but when paired with C6, this effect is triggered more than just once a rotation and becomes a lot more relevant to Faruzan. Lastly, C6 is Faruzan's Go Big or Go Home constellation. Like Goro C6, this constellation grants 40% crit damage to allies that deal animo damage under the effects of her burst. Additionally, those allies that deal damage can also help Faruzan trigger vortexes from her enhanced charge attack even when she's off the field. Not only is the crit damage buff ridiculous, but these extra vortexes that your allies can create generate additional animo energy for the team and heavily reduce the amount of energy recharge that Faruzan needs. I don't recommend chasing for C6 4-star characters as a free-to-play, but just keep in mind that her C6 is her best constellation and it's not even close. So I briefly mentioned that Faruzan has major energy problems and that her constellations help to fix that problem. Let's examine the details about Faruzan's energy so you can better understand what we're going to need to focus on when it comes to her builds. Looping back to her elemental skill, remember that it was a 6-second cooldown. Although this cooldown is pretty short, more often than not we're only going to use it once per rotation because while Faruzan's burst is active, the field time is occupied by your carries like Xiao, Heizou, or Wanderer. As much as I hate to admit it, combine this with the fact that her skill only generates 2 Animo particles and we have a recipe for disaster when it comes to Faruzan. 2 Animo particles is nowhere near enough to sustain a 60 cost elemental burst, let alone an 80 energy cost burst. So, what's the fix? Well, as I'll talk about in the weapon section, Favonius Warbow is the #1 option to fix this, but C4 and C6 also band-aid this issue quite well. C6 is especially important because, as I mentioned before, those extra vortexes generated by her allies can also grant energy. If we're being specific and getting into the theory crafting, Faruzan has an internal cooldown on her energy generation. What I mean by that is no matter how many vortexes you create through means like Sacrificial Bow or C1's extra Hurricane Arrow, Faruzan can only generate particles from a vortex once every 5.5 seconds. This timer is perfectly in line with her C6, where vortexes can only be created every 3 seconds by your characters, resulting in extra energy every other grouping vortex triggered by your allies. At C0, Faruzan's energy requirements are just above 200% with Favonius Warbow as an absolute minimum. Without Favonius Warbow, the requirements are so high that your build turns absolutely ugly. You could be looking at anywhere between 220 to 250 plus, depending on how much energy particles your teammates generate, and that's a generous estimate. However, when we factor in C4 and C6, more options open up for Faruzan to run less ER. With that being said, let's segue right into the weapon section so you know which bows will serve you and your Faruzan the best. When it comes to Faruzan's weapons, I hope you understand by now that energy recharge is the name of the game. If you're not C6, there's absolutely zero reason to run a bow that does not have an energy recharge stat. Starting off with Faruzan's best in slot, it's undoubtedly going to be the free-to-play option, Favonius Warbow. The massive ER substat gives Faruzan more freedom in her build, while the extra white energy particles from the passive not only battery Faruzan herself but also her teammates that need a lot of energy. Just remember to get around 50% crit rate as a minimum to keep consistency with proccing that passive. Although LG of the End provides a much higher base attack and a comparable ER stat, the lack of an ER focused passive puts it at #2 on the list as opposed to Faruzan's #1 option. Beyond Favonius and Elegy, there's 2 more free-to-play options that shine on Faruzan. The first is Fading Twilight, which is a 2.7 event exclusive bow that provides a decent amount of damage with a small ER stat. Obviously not as good as Favonius, but it can definitely get the job done for free-to-play players. The same exact things can be said about the Sumeru Fishing Bow end of the line. Sacrificial Bow is not as good of an option on Faruzan due to the fact that she has internal cooldowns on her energy generation. This means that even if we get the cooldown reset with the bow's passive, immediately launching another enhanced charge attack won't actually grant us an additional 2 Animo particles. However, if you need an ER bow and this is all you have available, it's still a viable option. Last but not least, if you're a C6 Faruzan player, you can also use weapons that grant attack and crit stats. The 2 bows that are the most beneficial to Faruzan outside ER options are Molin's Moon and Scoured Harp for the raw damage they give to Faruzan's abilities. Because of Faruzan's energy problems and her niche role, her artifacts are going to be quite streamlined. For a C0 Faruzan, her best artifact set in many situations is going to be the 4-set Emblem of Severed Fate. Not only does the 2-set give 20% energy recharge for her massive energy requirements, but she also has pretty good scalings on her elemental burst. Like many other characters, Faruzan appreciates the conversion of energy recharge in her build into some elemental burst damage bonus. Alternatively, you can double dip into the buffing role by giving Faruzan the 4-set Noblesse Oblige. The 2-set provides a small 20% burst damage bonus, while the 4-set can grant your carries 20% extra attack for 12 seconds after placing down Faruzan's elemental burst. If you're a beginner, you can run the 4-star artifact set, the Exile, for a cheap 20% boost to energy recharge with the 2-set effect, and 6 flat energy generation for everyone in the party aside from Faruzan with the 4-set effect. And last but not least, the 4-set Viridescent Veneer is viable if you have a Hydro, Pyro, Cryo, or Electro sub DPS, while the 4-set Tenacity of the Millilith is viable only if you have C6 Faruzan. Tenacity is only used on C6 Faruzan because all of her vortexes that pull enemies in count as elemental skill damage, including the ones from her C6 effect. As such, the 3-second interval on her C6 matches up perfectly with the 20% attack buff uptime from the Tenacity of the Millilith, making it the go-to option for buffing if you already have a Noblesse user on your team. For artifact stats, Faruzan wants energy recharge in the Sands, animo damage bonus in the Goblet, and crit rate or crit damage in the Circlet. Energy recharge in the Sands is a must on Faruzan. There's only a small minority of players that will have efficient enough artifact substat rules to replace the Sands with attack percent. Aside from that, animo damage and crit are pretty standard. Crit rate in the Circlet is especially recommended because it allows Faruzan to consistently activate Favonius Warbow's passive. Crit rate, crit damage, energy recharge, and attack percent are the usual suspects for focuses in substats to further increase Faruzan's damage. Although one may think Faruzan's teams are straightforward, there are slight differences between Xiao, Wanderer, and Heizou's supporting cast that I'd like to do my best to outline with the different options you have. Due to Xiao's use of plunge attacks and bigger need for energy, there's much less potential to drive certain playstyles compared to Wanderer and Heizou, who use normal and charge attacks and don't rely on their bursts nearly as much. As we already know, Xiao's most consistent option is the double Geobro setup with Zhongli and Albedo, but there are also other options to consider since this setup is not so free-to-play friendly. If you're missing the 5-star Geo duo, most players will then resort to Bennett to buff up Xiao. With Faruzan, Bennett, and Xiao as the core 3 characters, this opens up a lot of opportunities in the last slot. More often than not, to give Xiao and Faruzan more animo energy, we can slot in a 3rd animo character. Sucrose with the Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayer's Catalyst is the most common choice, but Jean is also a very safe pick to use. Pairing Jean with Bennett turns the team into a Sunfire setup. Aside from other animo characters, we can also use the last slot to give us the Pyro Resonance. Common Pyro characters to pair with Bennett and Xiao are Toma and C4 Yanfei for shielding, or Xiangling for raw Pyro damage. Other non-Pyro shielders like Layla or Zhongli are also very valuable in this slot and provide other ways to buff attack beyond the Pyro Resonance, such as the 4-set Tenacity or the 4-set Noblesse artifact sets. Next up, we have Faruzan paired with Heizou. Heizou has low multipliers on his normal and charge attacks, but packs a punch with his elemental skill. No pun intended. The pairing of Heizou and Faruzan includes Bennett as the 3rd character. He consolidates a huge attack buff with healing and makes for the perfect character to round out the core of the team. For the last slot, we need a character with off-field damage and elemental application so that Heizou can swirl an element and consistently build the Cleanshin stacks. Xingqiu and Yelan are fantastic for this role given how much raw damage they provide. If you're using these Hydro characters for another team, a shielder like Toma or a raw DPS like Xiangling not only provide consistent Pyro application off-field, but also provide the Pyro Resonance for even more attack to the team. You'll notice that this team is very similar to Heizou's optimal setup with the national team core of Bennett, Xingqiu, and Xiangling, but here we're sacrificing vaporized damage with Xiangling to see bigger numbers on Heizou's elemental skill with Faruzan. Last but not least, we have Wanderer with Faruzan. Take all the options that I discussed for Xiao, and those are all viable options for Wanderer as well. That includes the double Geo setup, the double Pyro setup, or the triple Animo setup. Now we can add even more variety with supports like Yunjin or off-field DPS characters like Xingqiu or Fischl. For example, if you want to run Wanderer and Faruzan with hypercarry supports, Yunjin with either Zhongli or Bennett make for fantastic hypercarry setups. Running Taser teams with Xingqiu and Fischl turn Wanderer into an on-field driver and provide some pretty good single-target DPS with the off-field DPS from both Fischl and Xingqiu. You can even run a double Cryo setup with Rosaria plus Layla or Diona to provide a huge crit rate buff for Scaramouche from Rosaria's Burst and the Cryo Resonance. Although I don't really have the time to cover all the possibilities with Faruzan and Wanderer, the world is your oyster when it comes to Scarra's team. If there's one thing I'm going to tell you when pairing Scaramouche and Faruzan, don't be afraid to experiment with what you have. With that, let me know your thoughts on Faruzan, whether it be questions about your builds, teams, or general opinions down in the comments below. Good luck to everyone pulling for her, and other than that, that's all I have time for today. If you enjoyed this guide or thought it was useful, be sure to support both the video and the channel. You can follow me on Twitch, Instagram, TikTok, or just sub to the YouTube channel, whatever people do nowadays. Other than that, it's the same as always. I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace.